Good morning, good evening, and whatever. As Pastor David said last week, time is where we find ourselves, and today we find ourselves in Mark, the 2nd chapter, through the 3rd chapter in the 6th verse. On one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" And he answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for the priest to eat, and he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath.' Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, 'Stand up in front of everyone.' Then Jesus asked them, 'Which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill?' But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and, deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus." This is the word of the Lord. I spent 25 years in education making rules, talking about rules, trying to enforce rules, and occasionally, truth be told, breaking the rules. I am well acquainted with rules, and also with the advice from one of my supervisors. Sometimes it is better to ask forgiveness than it is to ask permission. Perhaps that is truly a definition of grace. Even after leaving education and becoming a pastor, I've still been dealing with rules. The Book of Order can certainly be seen as containing rules as well as directions on how to achieve decent and orderly church governance. At least that's what I learned in polity class. I've had to use Robert's Rules of Order to conduct meetings, including the presbytery, as I served as moderator. And in youth and adult learning situations, I have been part of drawing up covenants that will be rules by which the group operates. We live in a rule-driven society and a rule-driven church. And some would say, only partly in jest, if we don't have a rule for a situation, we will most certainly form a committee and make one. But just as Robert's rules were developed to protect the opinion of the minority in governance and not to give you heartburn, rules are necessarily a part of our lives. Today's scriptures are filled with rules and or laws, but in the gospel lesson today, in Mark, we deal mostly specifically with the Sabbath rule. Matt Skinner, who's a Lutheran seminary professor and wrote a commentary on this passage, said there are two scenes in this particular passage, one in the grain fields and one in the synagogue. but they are very important for the whole totality of the Gospel of Mark. They illuminate why some of Jesus' contemporaries found him so offensive, and to such a degree that they would inevitably and eventually lead him into grave danger and his death. The theological convictions that run through Jesus' problems with the Pharisees are difficult sometimes for us as congregations to understand, and we kind of just default to the caricatures of the crazy Pharisees or the pompous Sadducees, and their unhelpful caricatures of Jesus' view on the law. The story begins, as all good stories begin, with Jesus' disciples literally making a way. And if you've ever walked through a cornfield or a wheat field, you know that you can tell when somebody's been there. They're making a way through a grain field. And they are not stealing grain as they journey. They're simply running their hands through the grain, picking it up and milling it in their fingertips and chewing on it. I've never done that, but if you're hungry enough, I guess self-milled barley is a good place to start. The problem isn't that they're feeding themselves. The problem is they're doing it on the Sabbath. And if you were a good Jew of this period, you had thought ahead and you prepared your snacks on the previous day. To the Pharisees, the behavior seems to deliberately neglect the mandate to observe the Sabbath and keep it holy. As we heard Laura read, you weren't supposed to do any kind of work on the Sabbath. Some people, even in our day and time, take this to be literally not turning on a light. Observant Jews in New York City often pay young people to come into their homes to turn on the lights or turn them off. I have a good friend who earned $0.25 a light switch. He thought it was wonderful. They also leave boxes, certain number of steps from their houses for food in case they are compelled to go out so that they can not have to purchase food on the Sabbath. Jesus disagrees not because he regards the Sabbath laws as anything trivial, but because he sees a larger picture. He sees the Sabbath in a different light. He turns to another piece of scripture about David, and even though the translators get the names wrong, or either wrong in the story of David or wrong in this case, but David does, in both stories, take consecrated bread that was supposed to just be for the priest. He insisted that the bread was necessary to sustain him because he was a fugitive and he was running from Saul and people that intended to kill him. Jesus implies that the priest did nothing wrong in breaking the strict letter of the law concerning the bread by allowing David to eat it. It was a higher calling to keep David and his friends alive so David could be anointed to replace Saul. In this passage in Mark, we're only 79 verses into the gospel, and already the Pharisees and the Herodians want to destroy Jesus. You may ask, who are the Herodians? They were, we believe, although it's not really recorded anywhere, it seems to be that they were the people who were supporters or hangers-on or of the party of Herod the king in Judea at the time. Even though these two groups aren't mentioned in connection together with Jesus' arrest, they're still in partnership early on in the narrative. In this pair of scenes, Jesus doesn't knock down or assail Judaism. He doesn't reject the law. He does not render the Sabbath obsolete. He doesn't even call the Pharisees blind guides or a pack of dulteds. It just leads Jesus to a great sense of grief and anger after he considers that these Pharaoh-like hearts of the Pharisees would take it to be so wrong to feed hungry people or to heal before the sun sets. But Mark tells these two stories and announces good news at the same time because it is the way by which Jesus shows what the good news of the gospel that he is bringing to the people truly means and what the laws, the commandments under which they had been living truly were supposed to be in their lives. We have in these two events not a call to anarchy, not a call to a no-rules society, but a call to a society that is free of fear and pretense and religious hypocrisy. Perhaps we can understand this in the more modern statement that crops up often in social media. God made people to be loved and things to be used. The problem today is too often humans are used and things are loved. In this passage, the rule or the commandment is in regard to the Sabbath. Think about your past and rules regarding the Sabbath. Blue laws in many states forbade the sale of certain items or even the opening of certain businesses. Perhaps there were societal or family norms in regard to actions or foods that could even be consumed on Sunday. My dad may have milked his cows twice a day on Sunday, but he would not go out in the hay fields to bale hay or into the woods to cut pulpwood on a Sunday. The Pharisees understood the Sabbath. What they didn't or couldn't appreciate was that Jesus, who they thought of as kind of some young uppity teacher, was delivering legal insights. Jesus definitely would have caught their attention with his assumption that he was comparing himself to King David and David's calling, and also declaring himself Lord of the Sabbath. That would be a scandal. They didn't see that it was wrong to do good on the Sabbath. The proper function in their mind is to promote life and extol God as a liberator. Everyone knew that. It was just they wanted to be in charge, not Jesus. Isn't that the way it's often with us and rules? We want everybody to obey them when it suits our life view, but we don't mind stretching or outright changing the rules when they limit our comfort or our power. The scene in the synagogue implies a conflict over authority, his values, and what he is claiming. Feeding his friends, healing the man. Although the man wasn't dying, his hand was withered, and it shows that he was no longer fully a part of the society. He couldn't work. So Jesus was giving him not back just the hand so that it looked better. he was also giving him back his ability to provide for his family, to make him a profitable worker in society again. Again, we see ourselves in that Pharisee complaint when the man is healed. Why was he worthy to be healed? We don't know how the hand became unusable. Maybe he had done something stupid. Because the Pharisees saw the laws as keeping their society and relationship to God orderly, perhaps in their mind, it was more important to keep the law than it was to heal and make whole this one individual. Jesus indeed did not break any of the work rules, but again he demonstrated that he spoke for God, who had given the law, and in doing so reduced the power of the temple leaders. And as we see in the last group mentioned, the Herodians, who were the followers of King Herod, we believe King Herod wanted to be top dog in the neighborhood. He certainly didn't want someone else being king of the Jews. So, what might be the rules to follow if we're going to improve upon or turn, as the Markan passage says, our stubborn hearts? Perhaps these rules might be necessary to follow. First of all, we need to ask, as in the Sabbath being made for man and not for the Sabbath, do we want rules to be enforced because of the good it does for others? Because a day set aside for rest was totally unheard of in that society. Or are the rules that we want to make meant to control people in such a way that the rule makers maintain power for themselves? We need to ask, for whom is this rule being made? We need also to ask, does the rule help us to worship God through how we treat others? The commandments of not lying, stealing, murdering, covenant are the rules made to protect all people. But do we sometimes use these rules to protect some people but not others? Do the rules speak of justice and mercy for all of God's people? Do the rules help us obey the greatest commandments of loving the Lord and loving our neighbors? And we need to ask, who benefits from the rule? For when we look at the Creator God, where is the Creator in the rule? Is creation being protected, loved, or is it being used and material things being protected and loved at the cost of the creation? Is God glorified in the institution and following of the rule? Or are we simply glorifying ourselves? Jesus said to his disciples in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I didn't come to destroy them, but to fulfill them." Jesus, in this stories of feeding and healing, is trying to remove useless, heavy weights piled upon people just because somebody could make them carry them. Jesus was filling the laws with the goodness that God intended for the rules to make in the lives of his people. It is one thing to be simply rule-abiding. Jesus calls us to be rule-fulfilling. So be it. Amen.